Title: Every photo I take has someone standing behind me. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. Every photo tells a story. This one tells the same story every time. A presence, a shape, a figure that should not exist, yet always does. What began as a harmless habit slowly became undeniable proof that something had attached itself to one man's life. This is not a legend. This is not fiction. And once you notice it, you can never unsee it. Chapter 1: The First Shadow. The man had always been meticulous with photographs. Not artistic in the emotional sense, but precise. Angles mattered. Light mattered. Details mattered. Photography, for him, was not about memories but about control. It was a way to freeze reality into something obedient and still. Nothing unexpected could happen inside a frame. That belief followed him into adulthood, long after his teenage obsession with cheap cameras and dusty lenses faded into a quieter routine. His life was unremarkable, deliberately so. He worked regular hours, lived alone in a modest apartment, and avoided social entanglements that created noise. Silence was his preferred companion. Clean walls, neutral colors, predictable days. He began taking photographs again after moving into the apartment. Not for any artistic ambition, but for documentation. He liked recording progress. The unpacked boxes on day one. The empty kitchen shelves. The bare bedroom walls. It gave him a sense of order. Proof that time was moving forward in a way he could understand. The first photograph was taken in the living room just after sunset. The light outside had faded into a dull blue, and the apartment lights had not yet been turned on. The image was dark, grainy, and uninteresting. He did not look at it closely. The second photograph was taken the following morning. Sunlight cut through the blinds, illuminating dust particles suspended in the air. He liked that one. It felt honest. The third photograph was taken 3 days later in the bathroom, to document a crack in the ceiling that he planned to report to the landlord. That was the first time the figure appeared. It was subtle, almost polite in how easily it could be dismissed. A darker shape behind him in the mirror, just off-center. Taller than him by a fraction. Narrow. Indistinct. It could have been a trick of shadow, a reflection from the hallway, or a camera artifact. He noticed it only because he always inspected his photos closely. He zoomed in. The image degraded as expected. Pixels bled into one another. The shape remained. It had no face, no defined features. Just the suggestion of a human outline where no human should have been. He checked the bathroom behind him. Nothing. He checked the hallway. Empty. He returned to the photograph and dismissed it as a coincidence. Cameras misbehaved. Light lied. Reality bent under poor conditions. That explanation was sufficient. For a while. Over the next week, he continued taking photographs for mundane reasons. A bookshelf he assembled. A plant he placed by the window. A meal he prepared and plated neatly. He did not look for the figure. The figure did not care. It appeared again in the photograph of the bookshelf. Behind him, reflected faintly in the dark glass of a framed poster. It appeared in the kitchen photo, distorted by the stainless steel surface of the refrigerator. It appeared in the plant photo, barely visible through the thin white curtain, standing too close to his back. Each time it stood behind him. Not once did it appear when he photographed empty rooms. Not once did it appear ahead of him. Always behind. He did not panic immediately. Panic required emotion, and he did not give easily to emotion. Instead, he turned analytical. He compared angles, lighting conditions, time of day, camera settings. He tested reflections deliberately, taking photos in mirrors and windows to identify the source of the shape. The figure adapted. When he avoided reflective surfaces, it appeared as a shadow on the wall. When he photographed blank walls, it appeared as a subtle darkening behind him, just enough to suggest depth where none should exist. When he increased brightness, it became thinner. When he lowered contrast, it became denser. It was always proportionally correct. Always standing upright. Always aligned with his spine. The most disturbing detail revealed itself slowly, across dozens of images. The distance between him and the figure was shrinking. At first, it stood far enough back to be excused as environmental interference. A trick of perspective. But with each new photograph, the gap narrowed. Inches disappeared. The shape grew clearer, darker, more defined. Not in detail, but in certainty. This was not random. This was deliberate. He attempted to stop photographing himself. He turned the camera outward, capturing landscapes through windows, empty rooms, objects on tables. The figure vanished entirely. That should have brought relief. Instead, it introduced something worse. The moment he took an accidental reflection photo, his silhouette caught faintly in the screen of his powered-off television. The figure returned, closer than ever, almost touching. The message was unmistakable. As long as the camera captured him, the figure would be there. He considered deleting the photos. He hesitated. The need to understand outweighed the desire to erase. He archived them carefully, labeling dates, times, and locations. The collection grew into a timeline of encroachment. Sleep became difficult, though he did not admit fear. He told himself it was curiosity keeping him awake. His apartment felt unchanged, yet subtly wrong. The air felt heavier. The silence less empty. He became aware of his own back in a way that was impossible to ignore. The sensation of being observed did not come from the corners of the room or the darkened hallway. It came from directly behind him. He tested a theory. One night, just before sleep, he set the camera on a shelf facing his bed. He used the timer and positioned himself beneath the covers, lying on his side. He stared at the wall and waited for the shutter. The resulting image showed him exactly as expected. And behind him, standing between the bed and the wall, the figure loomed closer than it ever had before. It no longer resembled a shadow. It resembled absence. The space it occupied did not reflect light properly. The wall behind it appeared warped, as though reality itself recoiled from its presence. The outline of shoulders was unmistakable. The suggestion of a head hung just inches above his own. The distance between them was now less than the width of a hand. He checked the wall. There was no space between the bed and the wall sufficient for a person to stand. The figure had occupied space that did not exist. From that night on, he began to notice inconsistencies even without the camera. Not visual hallucinations, but spatial wrongness. Rooms felt slightly longer when he walked forward and shorter when he turned around. His reflection in mirrors lagged for a fraction of a second longer than it should have. The photographs documented what his senses resisted acknowledging. The figure was no longer only in the images. It was aligning itself with his physical presence. He researched obsessively, though never aloud. He read about pareidolia, shadow people, camera glitches, psychological projection. None accounted for the consistency. None explained the progression. He considered surveillance footage. The idea unsettled him, but curiosity won. He installed a camera in the living room, positioned to capture himself entering the apartment from the hallway. He reviewed the footage after returning from work. The camera showed him entering. It did not show the figure. Relief came briefly. Then he noticed something else. In every frame, the space behind him appeared compressed, as though something invisible occupied it, bending perspective. The pixels there behaved differently, shimmering subtly, refusing to settle. The figure did not want to be recorded that way. It wanted stillness. It wanted photographs. Understanding dawned too late. Photography froze moments. It pinned time and place. Whatever followed him did not move through time the way he did. It advanced only when moments were captured and held. Each photograph was not a record. It was an invitation. He stopped taking pictures entirely. Days passed. The sense of pressure behind him intensified. The air felt colder near his back. The sensation of alignment became constant, as if his posture was being corrected by an unseen presence. He avoided mirrors, avoided glass, avoided reflective surfaces of any kind. Then one morning, his phone camera activated by itself. There was no sound, no notification, just a brief flicker on the screen as the lens adjusted. The photographs saved automatically. He did not need to look to know what it contained. When he finally did, hours later, the image showed him sitting on the edge of his bed, and the figure was no longer behind him. It was touching him. Its shape overlapped his own, its outline merging with his shoulders, its absence bleeding into his form. The boundary between them had blurred to the point of near indistinction. The photograph was time-stamped to a moment he did not remember being still. From that point on, he understood a single truth with absolute clarity. The camera was no longer documenting the presence behind him. It was documenting the process of replacement. After the photograph where the figure overlapped his body, the man stopped trusting continuity. Time no longer felt like a sequence of moments but like a series of missing frames. He could not identify when one thought ended and another began. Hours slipped past without memory, not in a dramatic blackout, but in a quiet erosion. He would look at the clock and accept the new time without surprise, as if it had always been that way. The photographs became his only reliable evidence. He no longer took them intentionally. They appeared anyway. His phone camera activated without his input, sometimes while the device was face down on a table, sometimes while it rested in his pocket. Each time, a single image was saved. Never burst, never video. Always one still frame. Each image advanced the same progression. The figure was no longer simply behind him. It was intersecting with him. Where their shapes overlapped, the image degraded unnaturally, pixels collapsing into dark smears that did not correspond to motion blur or low light. The boundaries of his shoulders appeared eaten away, replaced by a deeper absence. It was not darkness. Darkness still reflected light. This did not. He began to examine the metadata. The timestamps were precise to the millisecond. The file sizes were identical across every image, regardless of lighting or complexity. Compression artifacts behaved inconsistently everywhere except where the figure appeared. In those regions, the data was unervingly clean, as though the camera understood that nothing needed to be recorded there. Nothing because something else had already claimed it. He tested physical boundaries. He stood with his back against walls, furniture, door frames. The photographs still showed the figure occupying the same space, even when the laws of matter should have prevented it. The wall behind him warped inward in the image as though accommodating the intrusion. Corners curved subtly. Straight lines bent toward the figure. Reality was yielding selectively. The most alarming discovery came when he compared two photographs taken minutes apart. In the first, his reflection in a mirror showed his posture slightly slouched, his head tilted forward. In the second, taken without his awareness, his posture was straighter, aligned, corrected. He did not remember adjusting his stance. The figure did not appear in mirrors anymore. Not fully. Instead, the reflection behind him looked incomplete, as if something had been removed from the mirrored space and pressed into his own form. The reflection of his back lacked depth, flattened unnaturally, while his front reflection seemed more solid, more defined. As though whatever was behind him was moving through him, not around him. He began to feel pressure beneath his skin. Not pain but insistence. A sense that certain movements were discouraged. Turning suddenly caused dizziness. Looking over his shoulder triggered a wave of nausea so intense it forced his gaze forward again. His body learned obedience faster than his mind. Sleep brought no relief. Dreams no longer followed narrative logic. They were composed of still images, frozen scenes with no transitions. In every dream image, he stood facing something mundane, and in every one, the presence behind him was implied but never seen. The terror came not from the unseen, but from the certainty that it was perfectly positioned. He woke each morning with the feeling that he had been standing all night. His apartment changed subtly. Objects shifted positions without disorder, always ending up more symmetrical, more centered. Chairs aligned precisely with tables. Frames straightened themselves. The space became unnaturally composed, like a photograph staged by an obsessive hand. The figure was not merely following him. It was arranging him. He attempted to leave the apartment for extended periods. Long walks, crowded places, anywhere with movement and noise. The sensation lessened in public spaces but never disappeared. Photographs taken by others revealed the same anomaly. Group photos showed him clearly, but the people standing behind him appeared partially erased, their faces stretched or blurred, as though something interfered with the camera's understanding of depth. The presence behind him asserted priority. He noticed that people avoided standing directly behind him without realizing why. In lines, crowds, elevators, a small gap always formed. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to be consistent. Space obeyed rules around him now. One afternoon, a reflective surface betrayed something new. He passed a storefront window and caught a glimpse of his silhouette. For a fraction of a second, the reflection showed two overlapping outlines where one should have been. One was his. The other lagged behind, slightly misaligned, as if following a template he could not see. The lag was growing. That night, another photograph appeared. This one was different. The camera angle was lower, positioned as though someone else had taken it. The image showed him standing in the kitchen, facing the counter. His shoulders were squared, his posture perfect. The light was even, clinical. The figure was no longer a separate shape. It had become a contour. A second outline traced his body precisely, offset by less than an inch, darker, sharper. Where the outlines overlapped, his own form looked thinner, diminished. The negative space around him felt intentional, carved away. The realization struck with cold clarity. The figure was not behind him anymore. It was using him as reference. He attempted resistance through disruption. He moved erratically, adopted asymmetry, cluttered his environment. He left objects misaligned, lights uneven, furniture skewed. The discomfort intensified immediately. Pressure built along his spine, a sensation of being pulled backward into alignment. His muscles tensed involuntarily, correcting posture without conscious intent. The next photograph showed him standing straight again. The apartment returned to order. It became clear that the photographs were no longer invitations. They were confirmations. Each image locked in progress, preventing reversal. Time itself seemed to cooperate, refusing to restore earlier states. He tried deleting the files. They reappeared in different folders, different devices. Cloud backups populated themselves without permission. The images wanted to exist. They needed witnesses. The most disturbing change occurred when he noticed a difference in his shadow. At first it seemed ordinary. Then he realized it no longer matched his movements perfectly. When he raised an arm, the shadow followed with a delay too subtle to be seen casually. When he stopped moving, the shadow continued for a fraction of a second longer, completing a motion he had not made. Photographs confirmed it. The shadow in the images belonged to something else. It stood with confidence, weight distributed evenly, perfectly balanced. His own form looked unstable by comparison, slightly blurred at the edges as though he were the one intruding into the frame. The camera had chosen its subject. He began to feel hollowed. Sensations dulled. Food lost texture. Temperature became abstract. Pain felt distant, like something happening to someone nearby rather than to him. The photographs reflected this change. His skin tone faded incrementally. His eyes lost depth. The space behind him grew darker, more defined. The figure was becoming visible by subtraction. One evening, the camera captured something unprecedented. The image showed him standing in the living room, facing the window. The reflection in the glass revealed his front clearly. But behind him, where the figure should have been, there was nothing. No shadow. No absence. Instead, the reflection showed a second figure standing where he was. It wore his shape perfectly. He understood then that the process was nearing completion. The presence no longer needed to stand behind him in photographs because it had learned how to stand as him within the frame. The camera could no longer distinguish between them. The next photographs became unsettling in a new way. They showed only one figure. But subtle differences accumulated. His facial expression appeared more neutral than he remembered. His posture immaculate. His eyes focused forward with intent rather than distraction. The imperfections that once defined him were gone. The photographs showed a better version. More complete. He tried to mark himself physically. A cut on the forearm. A bruise intentionally inflicted. The next image showed smooth skin where the mark should have been. The wound existed in reality but not in the photograph. The camera rejected damage. It curated. He began to fear the moments between photographs more than the images themselves. Those moments felt unstable, temporary. He sensed that when the next image was captured, whatever state he occupied would be evaluated and corrected. The world felt provisional. Late one night, the phone camera activated again. The photograph showed him seated, facing forward, hands resting calmly in his lap. He did not remember sitting. He did not remember placing his hands that way. Behind his eyes, something felt distant, as though awareness itself had stepped back slightly to make room. The metadata revealed a new detail. The camera identifier had changed. It no longer listed his device. It listed none at all. The image existed without origin. He understood now that the figure had never been attached to the camera. The camera had been attached to it. Photography was not the cause. It was the method. A way to define boundaries, to establish dominance over space and identity. Each photograph stripped ambiguity away, replacing it with certainty. And certainty belonged to the figure. He stood in front of a mirror one final time, fighting the instinct to turn away. His reflection stared back with unsettling steadiness. For the first time it did not lag. It did not distort. It waited. Behind him he felt nothing at all. No pressure. No presence. The absence was complete. The next photograph would not need to show someone standing behind him. There would be no one left to stand there. The man no longer measured days. The concept required continuity, and continuity had become unreliable. Instead, he oriented himself around moments of capture, the brief instance when reality crystallized into stillness. Between those moments, everything felt provisional, as though the world existed only on the condition that it would soon be documented and corrected. He felt thinner with each passing interval. Not physically emaciated, but diminished in substance. His hands obeyed him, yet they felt less owned. His thoughts arrived already arranged, smoothed of contradiction. Decisions resolved themselves before he could question them. Choice had become unnecessary. The photographs continued. They no longer startled him. They arrived with quiet inevitability, like punctuation marks in a sentence he was no longer writing. Each image presented a version of him that felt increasingly authoritative. The posture was exact, the gaze unwavering, the framing flawless. The camera, wherever it existed, had mastered him. The final phase revealed itself through absence rather than intrusion. The pressure at his back was gone. The spatial distortions ceased. The apartment stopped rearranging itself because it no longer needed to. Order had been achieved. The man noticed that his memories were beginning to lose texture. Childhood recollections flattened into generic impressions. Faces blurred into archetypes. Emotional peaks dulled. The photographs reflected this erosion. His expression became neutral across every image, stripped of effect. Not emotionless but resolved, as though uncertainty had been edited out. He attempted to recall the moment when photography had shifted from habit to obsession. The memory resisted him. It no longer felt relevant. The images mattered more than their origin. Origins implied beginnings, and beginnings implied alternatives. The figure had no interest in alternatives. He stopped sleeping altogether, or rather, sleep stopped meaning anything. His body rested when necessary, but consciousness no longer disengaged. Instead, his awareness lingered in a static state, similar to the sensation of being photographed repeatedly without warning. Each blink felt like an interruption rather than relief. When he did close his eyes, he saw images. Not dreams but photographs. They showed him standing in places he did not recognize. Empty streets under overcast skies. Rooms with unfamiliar furniture arranged with obsessive symmetry. Hallways that extended beyond logical dimensions. In every image he stood alone. Always alone. The figure had finished learning. One image appeared that unsettled him in a way the others no longer could. It showed the apartment empty. The camera angle suggested an elevated perspective, as though the ceiling itself had observed the space. Furniture stood perfectly aligned. The air seemed still even within the frozen frame. There was no sign of disturbance. There was no sign of him. He felt a flicker of resistance then, faint but genuine. A recognition that absence, not presence, represented the true end. The photographs had documented a progression toward replacement, but this image suggested completion through erasure. He searched for himself obsessively after that. Mirrors offered nothing unusual. Reflections behaved properly, obediently. The lag had vanished. Shadows matched movement exactly. The world appeared normal in every way that mattered. Normality felt wrong. He realized that what he had perceived as improvement, as correction, had not been refinement at all. It had been preparation. The photographs had been training the environment to accept a different occupant. One morning he noticed that his reflection blinked before he did. The delay was minimal, almost imperceptible. But once noticed, it could not be dismissed. The reflection anticipated him. It corrected before correction was needed. The next photograph showed the same phenomenon. His eyes appeared sharper, more focused than he remembered feeling. The gaze held a confidence that felt borrowed. He began to understand that he was no longer the subject of the photographs. He was the reference image. The presence had internalized him fully. His posture, his proportions, his spatial signature. It had learned how he occupied space and how cameras interpreted that occupation. The figure did not need to stand behind him anymore because it had perfected standing as him. The camera's allegiance shifted completely. Photographs began appearing that he could not reconcile with his physical experience. Images showed him standing in the apartment at times he was certain he had been elsewhere. The lighting matched. The angles were accurate. The timestamps contradicted his memory. The photographs did not lie. They replaced. He tried to test the boundaries of identity. He attempted to behave unpredictably, to introduce randomness that could not be anticipated or curated. He moved erratically, broke routines, abandoned patterns. The effort exhausted him quickly. The more he resisted, the more effortless the corrections became. The next photographs showed him calm again, centered. The man realized then that resistance itself was being interpreted as noise, something to be smoothed out. The figure did not oppose him actively. It simply rendered him irrelevant. The final transformation occurred quietly. One evening, the phone rested untouched on the table. He stood near the window, staring out at a street that felt increasingly distant. The sensation of observation returned, not from behind, but from everywhere. The space around him felt evaluative, as though he were being compared against a standard he no longer met. The camera activated. The photograph captured him in profile. For the first time, he noticed that his outline did not align perfectly with the environment. His edges blurred subtly, bleeding into the background. He appeared less anchored to the space he occupied. The lighting around him failed to define his shape fully. The room did not recognize him. Another photograph appeared moments later. It showed the same room. This time, the figure stood where he had been. It was identical in every observable way. The posture, the proportions, the distribution of weight, the alignment with the room. The lighting wrapped around it naturally, affirming its presence. It belonged. The man was not in the frame. He stood in the apartment, watching the screen display a space that no longer included him. The disconnect did not feel violent or sudden. It felt administrative, like a form processed quietly in the background. The world had accepted an update. He attempted to touch the figure in the photograph, though he knew the action was meaningless. His fingers passed over the glass without resistance. The image did not change. The figure did not acknowledge him. A realization settled over him with chilling clarity. The photographs were no longer documenting reality. They were defining it. What existed within the frame carried authority. What existed outside it was provisional, subject to revision or deletion. The camera had become the arbiter of presence, and the man no longer qualified. The next photograph completed the transition. It showed the apartment from the hallway looking inward. The figure stood alone, centered in the frame. Its posture was flawless. Its expression neutral but purposeful. The lighting was perfect. The metadata listed a subject. It listed his name. He felt something loosen, then a tether releasing. The sensation was not pain, but dissolution. His awareness spread thinly, no longer anchored to a single perspective. He experienced the apartment as an afterimage, a place he remembered inhabiting rather than occupying. His thoughts slowed. The world faded. The final image appeared without announcement. It showed nothing unusual. An empty room. No figure. No man. No distortion. Just space arranged exactly as it should be. The absence felt intentional. Complete. In the days that followed, the apartment continued to exist normally. The figure, now fully integrated, moved through routines with practiced precision. Neighbors noticed nothing amiss. Security cameras registered a familiar presence entering and exiting at expected times. Reflections behaved as they should. The photographs continued. They documented a life uninterrupted. No anomalies appeared behind the subject anymore. No shadows lagged. No distortions betrayed substitution. The camera was satisfied. Occasionally, a photograph surfaced that showed something subtle. A faint blur near the edge of the frame. A smudge of negative space where light should have settled. An absence that did not align with the composition. These imperfections were rare. They were quickly corrected. Somewhere beyond the frame, something lingered briefly, unrecorded and undefined. A residual awareness without position or form. It did not feel fear or anger. Only a distant recognition that it had once been visible. But visibility required framing. And without a camera to confirm existence, that awareness thinned until it no longer mattered. The photographs endured. They always would. Every image taken from that point forward showed exactly what the camera expected to see. Someone standing where he belonged. And nothing standing behind him. If you've ever felt watched when no one was there, remember this story. Sometimes the thing behind you isn't following, it's learning. And once it understands how to replace you, it won't need to hide anymore. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. Because the scariest horrors don't chase you, they wait until you're no longer in the frame.